Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drayhon, back once again with another Dungeons & Dragons video. Today we are talking about flying PCs and NPCs, and how you, as a dungeon master or as a player, can deal with such characters. Now, I personally like the ability to fly. If I had known about that ability during some of my first games, I would have picked one of those characters. But there are some dungeon masters that don't like races that give you a flying speed at level 1. In fact, from what I hear, Adventures League outright bans the use of these characters. Why? I don't entirely know, because I have not experienced it myself. But the reasons I have heard are a bit lame, at best. I mean, rules as written, you can easily deal with a PC that flies at level 1. Let me explain. Today we are going over 6 tips that you can use in your games to deal with a flying PC or a flying NPC. And stay tuned to the end for a bonus tip. Alright, so starting off with tip number 1 is the Pythagorean theorem and ranged attacks. That's right, you thought you were done with this. But no, it's coming back for you. Dungeons & Dragons is a mathematical game, so it would make sense to have the Pythagorean theorem in some of your combats. And what is the Pythagorean theorem? Well, for those of you who still have this ingrained in your memory, I will spare you by not going over the details in full. But for those of you who are not experienced with the Pythagorean theorem, it is, well, I have it on screen for you. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. It's what helps you find the long side of a triangle. And we will be using that for our first tip. So when you have a ranged attack, so let's say a longbow, we have our range of 150 feet to 160 feet. Now the 150 feet is actually our normal range. Anything past 150 feet has disadvantage on the attack roll. So, for example, if our creature that's on the corner of C and B is 155 feet away, the attack is made with a disadvantage, which makes sense, because this is where our arrow is starting to make its descent back to the ground. Now, the 600 feet is our long range, and anything beyond this point is an automatic fail. No hit. So, say our target is 650 feet away. Automatic failure, do not pass go, do not collect those extra hit points. You have failed the attack. Like I said, this is actually very useful for combat against a flying character. And I really have nothing else to say about that, so let's go ahead and get into our second point. And that is researching your creature and use its measurements. For example, our Tarrasque friend here. According to Wizards of the Coast, the Tarrasque is 50 feet tall and 70 feet long. So, if our flying character who has a flying speed of 60 feet and flies directly above our Tarrasque's head, we can use our bite attack, which has a reach of 10 feet, and bite it right out of the sky. Or we can use our claw attack and our tail attack to slash at it out of the sky. And back to our first point of the Pythagorean theorem, if our flying character is just a couple feet away, it's not going to take too much to just snatch it out of the sky. You would probably be looking at about 10 feet away in order for the only attack to be able to land being the tail attack. That's on the Tarrasque. If you were to use any other creature, make sure you know how big it is. Look at its stats. How much reach does it have? Make sure you use everything that is given to you. Moving on to tip number 3, we need to drop those flyers. Make the moving speed 0. Knock them prone, whatever. In the player's handbook on 191, we have this to say about flying movement. If a flying creature is knocked prone, has its speed reduced to 0, or is otherwise deprived of the ability to move, the creature falls, unless it has the ability to hover or it is being held aloft by magic, such as the fly spell. Now, I don't totally understand the hover part, but we'll leave that alone for now. The key point here is to deprive our flying PCs or NPCs of their flying speed. They can't move, they drop like a rock. Sometimes almost literally. So, what ways can we drop our flyers? Well, we can restrain them with a net or the giant spider's web attack. Even ensnaring strike would work. Or the web spell. Spells also like hold person, hold monster, and hypnotic pattern would also work. Even the spell sleep would be useful, because that deprives them of movement. Poisons such as carrion crawler mucus, drow poison, essence of Itha, and torpor also work just as well. And for Pete's sake, if your campaign does not have any weather conditions, what are you even doing? Put some strong wind into one of your sessions. You'll probably have your characters climb up a mountain or are fighting in the middle of a storm. Use strong wind to make sure they do not want to fly. Heck, one of my favorite conditions is the exhaustion condition. Give your players enough exhaustion to reach level 5. This will drop their speed to 0. You can also use petrification to drop a creature from the sky, like a literal rock. Moving on to tip number 4. You need to fly after these flying PCs. Air Elemental, Griffin, a winged flippin' kobold, and even the namesake, the dragon. If your monsters do not have a flying speed, then yes, that is going to get very annoying when the flying PC decides to fly out of the reach of these creatures. So what you need to do is have a flying creature to fly after them. And when that character is distracted, or those characters are distracted, you also have the characters on the ground. So you are dealing with a split party. This will discourage your characters from trying to fly during combat so often. Moving on to our fifth tip. Indoor spaces and tight spaces. Whether it's the hallway of a castle, a tunnel of some dark cave, or just being in a tavern or other small structure. If your character is deprived of the space needed to fly, they're not going to fly. So long as you have some sort of ceiling. Even outside, for whatever reason you decide to have an encounter outside, have the encounter be in a forest where you have a very thick tree canopy. That way, any of your teeny tiny little creatures that are hiding inside the tree canopy will have some cover. And your flying PC will be reluctant to try to fly up because of how dense this canopy is. There'll still be a little bit of flight, yes, but not as much. Moving on to our final tip, and probably a controversial one, using carrying capacity and encumbrance rules. From keeping track of how many rations you have left and seeing how many arrows you have in your quiver, to just not being ridiculous and looking like a walking armory. Carrying capacity is a necessity in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, yes, I know this is a very controversial topic. I've heard a couple of different arguments for this. But I feel that carrying capacity and the encumbrance rules are actually pretty good. As is, they probably need some tweaking, yes. But they're still pretty useful, in my honest opinion. If we take a look at rules as written on the Player's Handbook, page 176, your carrying capacity is your strength modifier times 15. This is how many weight in pounds you are able to carry. For encumbrance, this is a optional variant rolling. If you carry weight in excess of 5 times your strength score, you are encumbered. Ugh. Words today. Which means your speed drops by 10. There's that speed drop again. That's going to be very useful. If you carry weight in excess of 10 times your strength score, you are heavily encumbered, which means your speed drops by 20, and you have disadvantage on ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws that use strength, dexterity, or constitution. Now, for example, let's go ahead and do some calculations real quick. If you have a decent strength score of 12, that's a +1 modifier. So your carrying capacity would be 15 pounds. For encumbrance, 60 pounds would cause you to be encumbered. Well, if you carry anything beyond 60 pounds. For being heavily encumbered, anything beyond 120 pounds would make you heavily encumbered. Now, if you're one of those people that make strength your dump stat, you're not going to be able to carry anything with a weight on it. And when you are going past if you go past 40 pounds, you are encumbered. Heavily encumbered if you go past 80. So that would actually encourage your characters to make slightly better builds and not dump the strength stats. Well, there are other ways to make sure your characters don't dump the strength stat, but this is a very good one to use. So if you want to be able to carry a good amount, I would suggest that you as a DM use the Quiver of Elona or the Bag of Holding. Alright, now we are done with that tip. Let's go ahead and move on to our bonus tip. And I have actually used this in a couple of my character conversions. I am talking about Volo's Complete Subrace Handbook. Now, this is technically a homebrew, so if you don't want to use it, that's fine. But I love Volo's Complete Subrace Handbook. It has different subraces and variants, and it rewrites a couple of different stats. For example, the Averial and Wing Kobold. Their flying speed has actually been reduced. If I remember correctly, it was reduced to 30. Also, at the end of the character's turn, if they are in the air and not being held aloft by the fly spell, they drop. It's one of the best things I've seen. It's why I love Volo's Complete Subrace Guide. That and all the other subraces that I'm able to get from it. Additionally, there is a racial feat that will improve the PC's flying speed to make it to where it is as written prior to using this handbook. You're going to have to check it out for yourself. I'll make sure to put a link to the DM's Guild so you can get this for yourself in the description down below. Well, that's all the time I've got for you, viewers. I do hope you enjoyed. Until next time, this has been Drehan, and I am offline.